I worked 2 jobs to pay for my daughter's college, only to discover she lied about attending, blew the money on shopping sprees, stole my identity for loans, and tried to ruin my life when I finally cut her off. Hi Reddit. This is my first post, and I'll try to keep it brief, though there's a lot to unpack. My name's Mark. I'm 47, and I have one daughter, Jessica, who's 22. Let me preface this by saying I've always tried to be a good dad. I'm not perfect, but I've worked damn hard to make sure my daughter had the opportunities one never did. Jessica grew up as my little girl. Her mom, Melissa, left when she was 7, so it was just the 2 of us for most of her childhood. I worked my way through life with 2 jobs, one as a mechanic during the day and bartending at night. It wasn't easy, but I always believed I was doing it for her future. When Jessica got into a decent university, I was so proud. She promised me she'd study hard and make it worth all the sacrifices I was making. I believed her. I believed in her. Over the years, I sent her money every month, enough to cover tuition, rent, groceries, and then some. She always told me she was doing well, acing her classes, and making friends. She even sent me pictures of her class projects and study groups. I thought I was supporting a young woman who was going to make something of herself. But then, a month ago, something happened that flipped my entire world upside down. I got a call from a former high school friend of Jessica's, Lauren, who I hadn't heard from in years. Lauren said, "Mark, I'm sorry if this is out of line, but I thought you should know Jessica isn't going to school." I laughed it off at first. I told her that couldn't be true. Jessica had been sharing updates, pictures, and everything. Lauren sighed and told me to check Jessica's social media. She said she wasn't trying to stir the pot but felt guilty knowing what Jessica was doing. I'll admit, I was irritated. I raised Jessica to value honesty, and the idea of her lying didn't sit right with me. So, I did what Lauren suggested. I checked Jessica's Instagram. What I found broke me. Instead of pictures of her on campus or with classmates, there were posts of Jessica at clubs, bars, exotic vacation spots, and expensive restaurants. One caption read, "Daddy's credit card hits different," with a laughing emoji. I was floored. But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I needed more proof. So, I called the university. The registrar informed me Jessica hadn't been enrolled in 3 years. 3 years. That's when everything began to unravel. After discovering Jessica hadn't been enrolled for 3 years, I felt like my chest was caving in. All this time, I thought I was helping her build a future, but instead I'd been funding, what? A lifestyle? Lies? I had to know the full story. I decided to confront her. Jessica came over for dinner the following weekend like she usually did once a month. She breezed through the door, acting like nothing was wrong. She was dressed head to toe in designer clothes and carrying a handbag that probably cost more than my rent. "Hey, Dad! How's my favorite guy?" she chirped, giving me a quick hug before heading straight for the fridge. I couldn't play along. "Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment before turning to me with her practiced innocent expression. "Oh, what's wrong?" "I called your university," I said, cutting straight to the point. Her smile faltered. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her tone defensive. "They told me you haven't been enrolled for 3 years. Her face turned red, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "What? Dad, that's not true. They probably made a mistake or something. You know how these admin offices are." I shook my head, pulling up the email from the registrar on my phone. "No, Jessica. There's no mistake. I have it in writing. You lied to me." For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Then she scoffed. "Okay, fine. I haven't been going. Big deal. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd freak out." "Big deal?" I repeated, incredulous. "Jessica, I've been working 2 jobs to pay for your tuition. Where's the money I sent you? What have you been doing all this time?" She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "I've been living my life, Dad. I'm an adult. I don't need to justify everything to you." "Living your life?" I could feel my blood boiling. "You've been lying to me, Jessica. I thought I was paying for your education, Not your vacations and parties. At this, her mask slipped, and she snapped. You know what, Dad? Maybe I lied because you're so controlling. You always want to know everything I'm doing. I deserve to enjoy myself for once. I was stunned. Controlling? I'd sacrificed years of my life to make sure she had what she needed, and this was her justification. I can't believe you, I said quietly, shaking my head. You've been stealing from me, Jessica. That's what this is. Stealing. Stealing? She barked out a laugh. It's not stealing if it's family. Besides, it's not like you needed the money. You're always working anyway. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Jessica, until you can prove to me that you're willing to take responsibility for your actions, I'm done. I'm cutting you off. Her face twisted into shock and rage. You can't do that. I can and I will. No more money. No more handouts. Figure out how to live your life without me funding it. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But the story doesn't end there. This was only the beginning. After Jessica stormed out, I was left sitting in my quiet living room, trying to process what had just happened. I kept replaying her words in my head. It's not stealing if it's family. The entitlement, the lack of remorse, it was like I didn't even know her anymore. I spent the next few days making changes. First, I canceled the credit card she'd been using. It was in my name, and I wasn't about to let her rack up another dime of debt. Then I called my bank and froze the joint savings account I'd opened for her when she first went to college. There wasn't much left in there anyway, but I wasn't taking any chances. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later when Jessica called me. I hesitated before answering, but I knew I needed to face her. Dad, she barked as soon as I picked up. Why isn't my card working? I was trying to pay for lunch, and it got declined. I canceled it, I said bluntly. What? She screeched. Why would you do that? I need that card. No, Jessica. You want that card. You don't need it. I'm not funding your lifestyle anymore. There was a pause, and then she laughed, a short, bitter sound. Wow, Dad. You're really going to do this to your own daughter? After everything I've been through? Everything you've been through? I repeated. Jessica, this isn't about what you've been through. It's about what you've done. You lied to me for 3 years. You wasted thousands of dollars I worked hard for. You don't even feel bad about it. I didn't waste it, she snapped. I used it to, I don't know, enjoy my life a little. Maybe if you hadn't been such a workaholic my whole childhood, you'd understand. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Jessica, I worked hard so you could have a better life. Not so you could throw it away on parties and clothes. Well, maybe I didn't ask for your sacrifices, she yelled before hanging up on me. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and guilt. Had I been too strict with her growing up? Too focused on work? Or was this just her way of deflecting blame? But things didn't stop there. A few days later, I started getting calls and texts from family members. Apparently, Jessica had gone crying to anyone who would listen, painting me as the villain. She told them I'd abandoned her, that I'd cut her off without warning, and that I was trying to ruin her life. My sister Karen called me and said, Mark, I get that you're upset, but don't you think you're being a little harsh? She's your daughter. Karen, do you know what she's been doing? I asked. She lied to me for 3 years. She wasn't in school. She spent the money I sent her on God knows what. And now she's trying to guilt me into letting it slide. Well, she's young, Karen said weakly. Kids make mistakes. 3 years isn't a mistake, I said firmly. It's a choice. And I'm done letting her take advantage of me. I thought Karen understood, but then my mom called. And my cousin. And even an old friend of mine who somehow heard about the situation. Jessica had turned this into a full-blown campaign to make me look like the bad guy. But I wasn't backing down. This was the line I had to draw. And I was about to find out just how far Jessica would go to get what she wanted. I thought the calls from family were bad, but I wasn't prepared for what Jessica did next. 2 weeks after cutting her off, I came home from work to find a tow truck parked in my driveway. My car, a beat-up but reliable truck I'd owned for years, was being loaded onto it. Hey! What's going on? I yelled, running over to the driver. The man looked at me with a shrug. Repossession order. Says here it was reported as abandoned by Jessica Roberts. Jessica Roberts? I repeated, my stomach sinking. That's my daughter. This is my car. The driver sighed. Look, man, I just do what the paperwork says. If it's a mistake, you'll have to clear it up with the repo company. I was livid. Jessica had apparently reported my car as abandoned, knowing it would trigger a repossession. I called her immediately, and to my surprise, she picked up. What the hell did you do? I barked. What are you talking about? She said, feigning innocence. My car, Jessica. Why did you report it as abandoned? Oh, that, she said, her tone casual. Well, I needed a way to get your attention since you've been ignoring me. Guess it worked. Jessica, you can't just mess with people's lives like this. I shouted. This is my truck. I need it to get to work. Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to ruin my life. She shot back. Actions have consequences, Dad. I was speechless. This wasn't just petty, it was malicious. I spent the next day sorting out the mess, proving ownership of the truck and getting it released from the impound lot. It cost me $300, and I was furious. But I also knew I couldn't let Jessica keep pulling stunts like this. So, I decided to take action. First, I changed the locks on my house. Jessica still had a spare key, and I didn't trust her not to try something while I was at work. Then, I reached out to a lawyer to discuss options for protecting my finances. That's when the lawyer suggested something I hadn't considered, running a credit check on myself. Sometimes, in cases like this, a family member might open accounts in your name, he explained. The thought made my stomach churn, but I agreed. Sure enough, when the results came back, there were 2 credit cards I didn't recognize, both opened within the last year. They were maxed out, totaling nearly $8,000 in debt. I knew exactly who was behind it. When I confronted Jessica, she didn't even bother denying it. Yeah, I opened them, she admitted. I needed the money, and you were being impossible. Jessica, that's fraud, I said, stunned by her audacity. Whatever, she scoffed. It's not like you're going to press charges. You're my dad. That's when it hit me, she thought she was untouchable. She thought I'd let her get away with anything because of our relationship. But she was wrong. I was done. Jessica had crossed every line imaginable. After confirming the fraudulent accounts, I told her flat out. You have 48 hours to pay off the debt, or I'm reporting this to the authorities. She laughed. You wouldn't do that to your own daughter. But this time, I didn't back down. I filed a police report. The look on her face when the officer showed up at her apartment was a mix of shock and betrayal. She called me, crying and screaming about how I'd ruined her life. No, Jessica, I said coldly. You ruined your own life. I gave you everything, and you chose to throw it away. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken control back. But I knew this wasn't over. Filing the police report set off a chain reaction I wasn't fully prepared for. Jessica was charged with fraud, and while it wasn't a felony due to the amount, it was still serious. She called me repeatedly, begging me to drop the charges, but I refused. I gave you so many chances, Jessica, I told her during one of her calls. You need to face the consequences of your actions. Her tone shifted from pleading to rage. You're the worst father ever. I hope you know that. You're choosing money over your own daughter. No, Jessica, I said firmly. I'm choosing to stop being your doormat. In the weeks that followed, the case moved forward. She ended up with a court date and had to hire a lawyer. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to get family members to help cover her legal fees, but most of them backed off once they realized the full story. Jessica's attempts to manipulate others were starting to backfire. Her lies, once so convincing, were unraveling. She was finally facing accountability, and for the first time, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Jessica's legal troubles sparked a rift in the family. Some relatives supported me, understanding that I had reached my limit, while others, like my sister Karen, thought I had gone too far. She's your daughter, Mark, Karen said during one heated phone call. You're supposed to protect her, not throw her to the wolves. She's 22, Karen. I shot back. She's not a kid anymore. She committed fraud. If I keep bailing her out, what lesson does that teach her? Karen wasn't the only one who felt that way. My mom, always the peacemaker, called to plead with me. Mark, I know she's made mistakes, but she's still family. Can't you just drop this whole thing? No, Mom, I said firmly. I've spent years giving her everything. It's time for her to grow up. Meanwhile, Jessica's friends began posting about me on social media. They painted me as a heartless monster, a dad who betrayed his daughter. One post even claimed I was abusive for forcing her to fend for herself. At first, the public backlash stung. But then, I realized something. Jessica was running out of people to manipulate. Her lies were unraveling not just with me, but with everyone else. The divide in the family grew wider, and I was left wondering how far Jessica would go to keep playing the victim. One evening, a knock at my door interrupted the rare moment of peace I'd managed to carve out. When I opened it, there stood Jessica. She looked different, less polished, almost disheveled. For a second, I felt a pang of concern, but I quickly remembered everything she'd done. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, my voice cold. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I hesitated but stepped aside. She walked in and sat on the couch, clutching her designer purse as if it were a lifeline. I need your help, she said finally, avoiding my eyes. I raised an eyebrow. Help with what? My lawyer says if I pay off the debt and agree to probation, the charges might get dropped, she explained. But I don't have the money. I was hoping you could, help me out one last time. I laughed bitterly. One last time? That's what you said the last 100 times. Why should I believe you now? Because I'm serious this time, she said, her voice rising in desperation. Dad, I know I messed up, okay? I don't know what else to do. I studied her, looking for any sign of sincerity. But all I saw was the same girl who had lied to my face for years. No, Jessica, I said firmly. You got yourself into this mess. You need to figure out how to get yourself out. Her expression shifted instantly. The pleading look disappeared, replaced by fury. You're unbelievable, she shouted, standing up. You're so obsessed with being right that you don't even care about your own daughter. I care enough to let you face the consequences of your actions, I said calmly. She stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind her. I watched her go, a strange mix of anger and sadness churning inside me. But something about her visit felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done causing chaos just yet. A week after Jessica's visit, I came home to find my mailbox overflowing with letters. At first I thought it was junk mail, but when I opened the first envelope, my heart sank. It was a collection notice, for a loan I'd never taken out. I opened another. Then another. Altogether, there were 6 letters, totaling over $20,000 in loans. All of them were in my name, and all of them had been taken out within the last year. I immediately called the loan companies to dispute the charges. After a long series of calls, I finally got confirmation. The applications had been submitted online using my information. And the listed email? Jessica's personal account. I was shaking with anger. I had already filed a police report for the credit card she opened, and now this? She was escalating, desperate to keep her lifestyle afloat. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Jessica, I said through gritted teeth. Did you take out loans in my name? She didn't even try to deny it. I didn't have a choice, she snapped. You cut me off, Dad. I needed money to survive. Survive? I yelled. Jessica, this isn't survival. This is fraud. Do you even realize how serious this is? Maybe you shouldn't have pushed me into a corner. She shot back. You forced me to do this. I forced you? I repeated, stunned. Jessica, you've been lying, stealing, and manipulating everyone around you, and you're still trying to blame me? You're the one who turned your back on me. She hissed. Don't act surprised that I'm doing whatever it takes. I hung up, my hands trembling. This wasn't just entitlement or immaturity anymore. This was something deeper, darker. I called my lawyer and explained the situation. He advised me to file another police report immediately, and I did. This time, I also reached out to the loan companies and froze my credit entirely. Jessica's betrayal had gone beyond anything I could have imagined. I wasn't just dealing with a spoiled daughter, I was dealing with someone who had no boundaries. And I knew things were about to get even worse. After filing the second police report, I thought I'd done everything I could to protect myself. But a week later, I got a call from my boss. "Mark," he said cautiously, "we need to talk. I just got off the phone with someone claiming to be from a debt collection agency. They said you owe thousands and threatened to garnish your wages. What's going on?" I was stunned. "That's not true. Those debts are fraudulent. My daughter—" I stopped myself, realizing how insane it sounded. "It's a long story, but I'm handling it." "Well, I hope so," he said, clearly skeptical. "We can't have this kind of thing reflecting on the company." I hung up, furious and humiliated. Jessica had clearly escalated again, using the fraudulent loans to attack my livelihood. This wasn't just about money anymore, she wanted revenge. I confronted her one last time, showing up at her apartment unannounced. She opened the door, looking irritated. "What are you doing here?" "Jessica," I said, barely keeping my composure. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've jeopardized my job now. Debt collectors are calling my workplace because of you." She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you threw me to the wolves." "I didn't throw you to the wolves," I snapped. "I gave you everything, and you abused it. You've lied, stolen, and now you're trying to destroy my life because I said no for once." "Whatever," she muttered, rolling her eyes. "You'll be fine. You always are." That was the last straw. I told her, "You've made your choices, Jessica. From now on, you're on your own. Don't call me. Don't come to my house. I'm done." I walked away, knowing I'd done everything I could to save her from herself. But Jessica didn't seem to care. As I drove home, I realized she wasn't going to stop until she hit rock bottom, and I had to let her fall. After my confrontation with Jessica, I knew the only way forward was to completely cut her out of my life, for my sanity and safety. I blocked her number, removed her access to anything tied to my finances, and let the family know I wouldn't be discussing her with them anymore. Of course, Jessica didn't take it quietly. A few days later, I started getting emails from her. At first, they were full of apologies, saying she learned her lesson and needed help. But when I didn't respond, the tone quickly shifted. "You're a terrible father," one email read. "You've abandoned me when I needed you most. Don't expect me to be there for you when you're old and alone." I didn't reply to any of them. I forwarded every threatening or manipulative email to my lawyer, who assured me I was doing the right thing by creating a paper trail. Then, Jessica tried another tactic. She reached out to Karen, my sister, and enlisted her to mediate. Karen called me furious. "Mark, she's your daughter," Karen shouted. "You can't just cut her off like this." "I can and I have," I said firmly. "Karen, I love you, but you don't understand the damage she's caused. This isn't just a spoiled kid acting out. She's committed crimes. She's put my job and my future in jeopardy. She's family." Karen argued. "No, Karen," I said, my voice cold. "Family doesn't do what she's done. I'm done being her victim." Karen huffed and hung up, and for the first time, I felt no guilt. I'd spent years bending over backward for Jessica, and it had only made her worse. But I knew Jessica wouldn't stop. She thrived on chaos, and I was bracing myself for her next move. For weeks, I heard nothing from Jessica. No emails, no calls, nothing. At first, I felt relief. Maybe she'd finally gotten the message. But deep down, I knew better. Then, one day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from her lawyer. Jessica was suing me, claiming I'd emotionally and financially abandoned her, causing irreparable harm to her life. I couldn't believe it. She was actually trying to make me legally responsible for her failures. I called my lawyer immediately. He reassured me it was a baseless claim, likely a desperate move to get me to settle. But as I stared at the letter, I realized just how far Jessica was willing to go. She wasn't stopping until she burned everything down, or herself out. I wasn't going to let Jessica drag me down without a fight. My lawyer filed a counterclaim, outlining the fraud, the fake loans, and the damages she'd caused me. He made it clear, if she wanted to take this to court, I was ready to expose everything. Jessica must have realized she'd overplayed her hand because, within days, her lawyer contacted mine, suggesting a settlement. She wanted me to cover some of her legal fees and drop the counterclaim in exchange for her dropping the suit. Absolutely not. I told my lawyer. She doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. When Jessica found out I wasn't budging, she sent me one last email. It was short and venomous. "You're dead to me." I deleted it without a second thought. If cutting ties was what she wanted, I was happy to oblige. Jessica's lawsuit was officially dropped, and the silence that followed was almost unsettling. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm. But I also knew better than to assume it was over. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Karen. "Jessica's in trouble," she said, her voice low. Apparently, Jessica had been evicted from her apartment after failing to pay rent. She'd burned bridges with most of her friends, and now she was couch-surfing with strangers. Karen, ever the enabler, wanted me to intervene. "No," I said flatly. "She's made her bed." "You're her father," Karen argued. "Don't you care what happens to her?" "I care enough to let her face reality," I replied. Helping her now would undo everything. Karen hung up, frustrated, but I stood my ground. If Jessica was finally hitting rock bottom, maybe it was the wake-up call she needed. Months passed, and for the first time in years, my life was quiet. No calls, no drama, no surprises in the mail. Jessica had completely disappeared from my radar. Then, out of the blue, I received a letter. It was handwritten, and the shaky script told me it was from Jessica. "Dad, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I needed to say it. You were right. About everything. I've been selfish, manipulative, and reckless. I've hurt you and so many others, and I don't know if I can ever make it right. I've started therapy. I'm working part-time and staying at a shelter for now, but I'm trying to rebuild. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I understand if you never want to hear from me again. I just wanted to say thank you for finally standing up to me. I didn't see it then, but it's the only reason I'm trying to change now. Love, Jessica." I sat there, staring at the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, convinced it was another manipulation. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the little girl I used to know, hoped it was real. For now, I wasn't ready to respond. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different.